Okay, sorry about that, y'all. So a quick word for those of you who are less familiar with FCYO. We're an organization that bridges funders and organizers to build a more powerful, well-resourced, and interconnected youth organizing field. And we do that through a combination of funder advocacy, direct grant making, and this project that we call Youth Core, of which this webinar series is a part. And one thing that I just want to name so people are clear, increasingly we are trying to create spaces to bring funders and organizers together to have strategy conversations, because we believe that philanthropy is in fact part of the field and not just the resources of the field. And so this call has both youth organizers and funders, as well as other capacity builders and researchers. So people should just be aware of that. That's intentional, because like I said, we think we need to be having these strategy conversations together. So before I pass it off to our panelists, I just wanted to say a few words about what for FCYO were some of the key takeaways from this election as it directly pertains to the participation of young people. And that will be the focus of our conversation today. So one, I think people have probably all seen the headlines that this election witnessed a historic youth voter turnout. And I think especially in those places where some of the elections were decided by razor thin margins, it just speaks to how much of a difference young people can be as a core constituency within voter mobilization. The second thing is that across the country, we saw groups that were not only trying to register and mobilize young voters, but they had young people playing leadership roles in turning out the entire community vote. So mobilizing other voters within their communities. And I think this is especially important because a lot of the young people that our organizations are working with may themselves not be eligible to vote. Either because they're young or in some cases because they're undocumented. The third bullet point is that elections are really good youth leadership development opportunities, and youth organizing is well positioned to keep young people engaged in between elections. So really, one of the things that we really hone on or harp on at FCYO is the need to think in terms of long-term strategy. And the processes of building bases and developing young people to lead is not something that happens within one election cycle, though elections are really great opportunities for that activity and good chances for us to kind of measure what kind of progress that we're making. But we need to be able to have the capacity to build on that work in between elections, and because of their commitment to leadership development and issue organizing, youth organizations are really well positioned to engage young people in electoral work. Which leads to the fourth point, which is it's really important to invest in youth civic engagement now. And this is especially for the funders on the line or the people who have relationships with funders. Anybody who does the civic engagement work can tell you that, there are these boom and bust cycles of investing in civic engagement work. And, the faucet gets turned on in a few months before election and then it cuts off. And that's a really big missed opportunity, because now is the time for us to continue to build the infrastructure and develop people's capacities to be able to do even more work in the next election cycle. And the other point that's connected to this is this election cycle, we saw some really major victories. So for example, RISE in Richmond was part of an effort to pass a municipal ballot measure that drastically changed the property tax rate to increase funding for things like youth services, job training programs, and so forth. Obviously, in Florida, we saw the passage of Amendment 4, which has given formerly incarcerated people their right to vote. These are efforts that were 5, 10, 15 years in the making. And so the ongoing organizing work between elections is just as important as what happens in the 6 to 12 months before the election. And so investing in that work now is really key. So I just wanted to, so those were the kind of major takeaways for FCYO. Now I'm gonna pass it over to our first guest, Bob Wing. I'm gonna let Bob introduce himself and say a little bit about how, how he comes to this work. Bob's got some slides he's gonna take us through. And Bob's focus is really on just kind of providing us with the overall landscape as it is now and kind of some of the big picture takeaways from the election more broadly. And then we're going to go into our panel with guests from Ohio Student Association, Youth United for Change, and Act for Women and Girls to talk about the specific roles that they played in this work and kind of what their major takeaways are from organizing young people in their communities around this election. So with that being said, Mona or Will, can you make sure Bob is unmuted? And I'm going to pass it off to Bob.
Okay, thank you all for having me. My name is Bob Wing. I have been an activist now, actually this fall marks 50 years of activism for me, and where I really cut my teeth was in the brawl that was called the Third World Strike that created what is now called ethnic studies. That started 50 years ago at San Francisco State and then 50 years ago at UC Berkeley in January. And I've been active ever since. I currently work with a group called the State Power Caucus, which is an alliance of 26 statewide organizations, almost all led by people of color and women, that are community organizations that also do electoral work. I am not speaking for them today. I'm just speaking for myself. And a little advertisement. Since it's my 50th year, I decided to go ahead and put out a book this year. It's called Towards Racial Justice and a Third Reconstruction, available at lulu.com. And I also just opened up a website, bobwingracialjustice.org. All right, so into it. Are you going to move the slides, Mona, or do I move them?
I don't have access to them, so you'll have to move them.
I'll move them, Bob. Just let me know.
Okay, great. So the overall takeaway for me is what's on this slide, that the midterm election was a big victory for Democrats and progressives, and they are separated for good reason. They are not the same, which some people like to merge. Big victory for Democrats and progressive, which means even deeper polarization in the country between conservative forces and progressive forces, and increased need for organization, unity, and strategic clarity for progressives to be able to defeat Trumpism and the far right. To me, that's the overall takeaway, but I'll break it down as we go. I'm going to fly through the first few slides because I think people pretty much know these things, but I'm going to fly through. So just the first slide is that the Democrats won the House, which changes.
Yeah, we're just gonna just do different spaces. Yeah.
I'm hearing somebody else. Do I keep going? Okay. The Democrats captured the House, which is a big game changer. They won about 35. It seems to keep increasing. I'm not going to go through these numbers, but they won the House. They didn't win the Senate. They flipped a number of governorships. They flipped a number of state legislatures. And what it means is that the balance of power in the country has definitely been changed. Next slide. The Democrats, the biggest vote was for the House because all House seats were up, and the Democrats won by 7, maybe up to 8%, which is in American elections is a big victory. And they gained voters, voter percentage. They didn't win every voter group, but they gained voter percentage in every single voter group. The main base of people of color, you can see that held and even increased. A big gain among millennial voters. Big props to all you who helped out with the millennial vote. Very importantly, a gain of 10% among voters who earn less than $30,000 a year. And under the radar, compared to others, is a big gain among whites, both men and women, and a significant gain among rural voters. Next slide. So what it means is that the Democratic Party and the progressive movement are quite different than what they were in 2016. There's a level of activism, excitement, organization, grassroots fundraising. The progressive side of the spectrum has been lit and is heavily involved in elections. And it doesn't mean that progressives are now the dominant force, but they are a much bigger force than they have been for many years in elections. Next slide. But Trump, it's very important. Trump and the Republicans are obviously still dominant. Trump himself dominates the Republican Party even more than before. He just really wiped out any candidate who didn't basically come full support for him. The Republicans still control most of the federal government, the presidency, Senate, federal judiciary, still a major force in the House, still control a majority of state governors and legislatures, and a vast majority of localities. Next. So what this brings us up to, though, is face-to-face with a very undemocratic electoral system and how to overcome it from a progressive point of view. So the total House vote, the Democrats beat the GOP by 7%. That's pretty much the same percentage the GOP won the House vote in 2010. In 2010, that enabled the GOP to take 63 seats compared to the Democrats winning about 35 this time with the same vote. In the Senate vote, the Democrats beat the GOP by even more, 12%. Actually more than the victory of the GOP in 2010. But the GOP held on to the Senate this time, whereas the wave vote for the GOP in 2010 enabled them to win the Senate. So what all this adds up to is that our electoral system does not reflect accurately the actual vote, the actual sentiments and votes of the people in the United States. Let's go to the next slide. So I think what I want to look at is how, and emphasize is, I think we all have to come clear, and this is going to be very rapid, about how does the minority rule happen through the Republican Party in the United States, and what advantages do conservatives in general have in the electoral system. Overall, the system favors white, small states, and rural voters, especially white rural voters, and is built around the states, not around the federal government. Starting with the presidency. So obviously the presidency is not chosen by a popular vote, it's chosen by an electoral college. The electoral college enables very conservative white voters, especially in the South, to basically nullify almost half of the black vote, because 54 or so % of black voters live in the South. In the South, white voters vote anywhere from 70 to 90% Republican, which enables them to win the state vote in almost all of the southern states, though they're coming closer, and that battle is on, but it goes on in a terrain very unfavorable to black voters, and makes it so that the outcome in most states is as if black voters didn't vote at all. It also favors small population states because they get overrepresentation. Even if their population is less than half of a congressional district, they get 3 electoral votes. The judiciary is locked up because of the way the Republicans have acted in the Senate, refusing the Obama nominations and then nominating more. Trump has put more judges on the bench, I think, than any president in history, not just the Supreme Court. In the Senate, the Senate is basically, as you all know, 2 votes per state, and there are about 23 rural, small population, largely white Republican states, which gives them a huge advantage in the Senate. There are far fewer largely blue, large population states. And so that makes it so that they need very few additional votes from the purple states or from the blue states to dominate the Senate. In the House, As I said, the big vote for the Democrats did not translate into nearly as many seats gained as for the Republicans, and that's really due to the fact that the Republicans control most of the states. They've gerrymandered all of them in their favor through redistricting, the control of redistricting. In legislatures, again, the legislatures are also gerrymandered through redistricting, and of course, voter suppression has become a bigger and bigger issue. Large parts of the Voting Rights Act have been nullified. All sorts of voter ID laws have been passed, outlawing the votes by former felons, etc. And in addition to all that, straight up voter suppression efforts by threat, both physical and political. So basically, we have a system that very strongly favors conservatives in our country and makes it harder and harder for, much harder, that is to say, for progressives to show their strength in the electoral system. But it's a system we have, and it can and needs to be overcome, and we made a good chunk of it this time. And as you can see in each case, it focuses particularly on the role of states in the Electoral College, in the Senate, in the House seats. These are all redistricting, are all decided by the states. And so it is really important to win in the states and not just the national vote. Next slide. So just to conclude, the main takeaways for me out of the election are that we need to be ready for increased, oftentimes even brutal political polarization in the country. Largely, the polarization is increased largely because the progressive side of the spectrum and the Democrats have increased their activity and are not laying down as much as they had before and are really in the fight. And so we saw all sorts of things happen in this election, which will probably increase into the future. Second, that there's also increased polarization within the Democratic Party between progressives and corporate Democrats or moderate Democrats that will have to be handled and will probably increase. And hopefully, as we get stronger, we've seen that sometimes it causes big fights inside the Democratic Party. Third, that we're going to have to keep building and be more strategic with how we build so that we really do target, use our strengths and identify the weaknesses in the electoral system and target ourselves to maximize our impact. And so the strategic intelligence and organization of the resistance has to be kept up and built out to keep up the momentum. And lastly, that I think that the election showed that the broadest possible front of against the far right is needed if there's going to be progress towards democracy and social justice. That's it.
Let me unmute myself. Thank you, Bob. So with that kind of initial volley of just kind of giving us a broad landscape of the political terrain, given the outcomes of this elections, we're going to transition now into our youth organizing panelists. So we have Jasmine from ACT for Women and Girls, Prentiss from Ohio Student Association, and Kat from Youth United for Change. Again, I'm going to let them each kind of do a quick introduction for themselves, any kind of key words that they want to say. And the way that this is going to go for the next about 35, 40 minutes or so, we're going to do these in rounds. So I'm going to ask a question. Each panelist will have an opportunity to kind of, we'll do that initial round, and then there will be an opportunity for anybody to kind of chime in based off of what they heard in that round, including you, Bob. If somebody else says, sparks something that you want to raise up, feel free to chime in. So with that, I'm going to pass Jasmine, if you can go first. And the first question that I'd like everybody to respond to is, if you could just say a little bit about all strategy as an organization, and then tell us a little bit about the specific program you ran in 2018 and that young people played and what the results were. So Jasmine, can you kick us off?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me. Act for Women and Girls is located in Visalia, which is in Tulare County, so right in the middle of California. So for us, a lot of issues that we work on are not new. They have a history of here in the Central Valley. But I want to say that Act for Women and Girls is a reproductive justice organization. So our organizing framework is reproductive justice. And one of those tenets is that folks who are most impacted by these issues are the folks leading the work. And so for us, doing electoral organizing is just has really helped us organize on a new level to really build our power. So not only to turn out the vote, but also do that like integrated voter engagement where our young folks are developing leadership skills, but also learning how to run electoral campaigns. I'm going to talk a little bit about the programs that we ran this year. So our campaigns are twofold. We're doing voter identification to turn out voters, but we're also trying to build up our base as an org around issues that we're trying to organize around year round. So for us this year in the primary, we organized around immigration. We live in one of the counties in California where our Board of Supervisors voted to go against the California Values Act, which is the sanctuary state law. So in our calls, we spoke to many, many people who supported sanctuary state and immigrant families. So what we're seeing a lot of times is that disconnect between our communities and the people who represent us. So for us, electoral organizing and integrated voter engagement is a way that we're trying to really engage young people and their families to really understand how we can use the system that wasn't made for us, but can use it to create some change. We live in an area where big agriculture and big oil have really entrenched interests. So literally just trying to build that people power. So we did voter registration, school-based and peer-to-peer. We ended up registering over 600 young people, new people throughout Tulare County. For our fall program, we did a we knocked on doors and we called voters. So we ended up knocking on about 7,000 doors, having about 2,000 IDs. And we focused on Visalia, Lindsay, and Avenal, which is in Kings County, another pretty conservative county here in the Central Valley. What was really great for us is that the young people were leading those teams. So Lindsay is about 20 to 30 minutes from Visalia. So we had a young person who was our campaign lead there from that community who was leading the canvas there. And then we had a young person who had been our summer fellow through a program called the Central Valley Freedom Summer that kind of honored the Civil Rights Freedom Summer of college students who had gone away, who had left their rural communities to go to school and had come back for the summer to register their peers to vote. And so one of those young people stayed on and became a campaign lead. These are rural communities that tend to be pretty small. I think her city had about 2,000 registered voters. So we knew that they would be able to have really quality conversations with each voter there, which is really important because their turnout tends to be really low. So you have folks who are taking important seats by like 10 to 15 votes. And, this is a place that this young person tried to organize some events over the summer and was experiencing a lot of pushback from the elected folks there. And so just really to bring that consciousness to the young people that that their vote literally determines the landscape of their city. So a lot of it was also just like voter education, but also talking to the people in the community to see what issues they wanted to organize around. And for our fall campaign, our issue was around pesticides. So I mentioned, we live in pretty rural agricultural centers. And so earlier this year, we had organized around glyphosate on campuses. So glyphosate is the main chemical in Roundup, which is pretty toxic and has been linked to cancer. So we were successful in getting that off of our local school district, but we want to expand that to have all public areas find an alternative to glyphosate. And even further than that, just to really address what's happening right now with the EPA and the loss of restrictions around these toxic pesticides that are poisoning our folks and our air and our food and our water. So like I mentioned, for the fall, we were able to knock on doors, but we were also able to have our largest phone program. So we're part of a statewide network with Power California. So we ended up contacting around 5,000 voters throughout Tulare County, Kern County, and Kings County. So 3 of the most conservative counties in California, right in the center of the state. So as you can see here, some photos of our young folks canvassing and phone banking. So towards GOTV, we pivoted to call around housing propositions. So as most of you know, California is facing a huge housing crisis right now. And so one of those propositions, Proposition 5, which would have been a tax break for seniors 55 and over who were buying a second property. So we were able to stop that proposition, which really is going to be connected to the Prop 13 reform, which we'll probably see in 2020. And then Prop 10, which is about repealing Costa-Hawkins, which is a rent control measure, so allowing local governments to set their own rent control. It didn't pass, but for us, what was really great is that we did a lot of consciousness raising and leadership for our young folks to understand, first of all, like tax breaks and like the tax system, and also to talk to other people about what housing with dignity means to them, especially since that conversation is going to be different for us in the Central Valley than it is in San Francisco or LA. So a big outcome for us as well is that pathway for our young folks coming from different programs. So we have school-based programs. We also have a feminist leadership academy, and we also have a program for young parents. So to bring young people from different areas who are coming from like these school chapters or are in a like young mom support group or just, are connected through a friend, to be able to form a cohort where they're learning political education, how to do voter reg, but even for those who are returning, because we have a lot of folks who were here for the primary or who did our issue organizing last year, they're becoming campaign leads. Brianna, one of our campaign leads, started off as a canvasser, and as I transition out of the org later this year, she's going to be taking on the campaign manager role. So for us, like, it really is about that pathway of, a young person comes in as a program participant, but we want to keep building them up. Another big piece for us, and we saw this in our area, is a lot of young people starting to run for local seats, city council, school board. A big thing here are the water boards. People who sit in the water board seats have a lot of power. And so we really want to create this hub for political education where not only are young people mobilizing voters, but they're also seeing that they can run campaigns. You know, how once you start having these tools, you know, whether it's understanding how to use a voter file, how to look at data, how to create walk lists, this is all power for us. You know, we could be our young folks, if they want to run, you know, they can run and know that they have these resources and they have other young people who will walk or make calls for them. This is like a vehicle that it's infrastructure that hasn't really existed here in a large way, or has been accessible, right? We still know that running is, it costs a lot of money, so it has been historically inaccessible, but this is how we build something where we have the power. Also for us, it's really important to see young people of color, young women of color running campaigns. That's something we still don't see very often. So I think for me specifically, it's really important. I've had folks who have helped me to be better using like PDI and the voter file and looking at data. So I definitely am trying to pass that on to anyone and everyone who is excited for that. So those were some of the outcomes and wins for us. I think we've positioned ourselves really well for 2019. We have a list of supporters that we've ID'd, and we're going to continue to organize around those issues. So we're hopefully going to be getting some of those local wins that we can also put towards our legislative work at the state level.
Awesome, thank you, Jasmine. And really just want to uplift for the overall conversation, the piece that you raised around how like these electoral cycles build skills that translate into like longer term infrastructure for the local work, even beyond the direct work that our organizations are leading. And that leadership pipeline, which is not just an internal leadership pipeline, but it's really a movement pipeline. So thank you for naming that piece. Prentiss, let's pass it to you. I'm going to stop sharing because I think that's all we have for the slides. So Prentiss, same question. If you could tell us a little bit about kind of the role that electoral organizing plays more broadly within OSA, and then what the specific program this last cycle looked like and some of your major takeaways.
Yes. Thank you. So don't have any slides. We literally, I feel like the election's not really over, but okay. But my name is Prentiss Haney. I'm the executive director of Ohio Student Association. And and this, the electoral strategy in OSA is a core tenet of how we win. There's 1.8 million young people, millennials in Ohio, 18 to 29 in the state. 440,000 of those are in the 200 higher education institutions in the state. And we need them to change how our state runs. Electoral strategy is at the center of what we do. We believe that OSA is supposed to be a political home for young people in the state, building independent political power so they can yield the power of their youth share in the state, in the electorate, also in public policy advocacy, but most importantly in cultural shifting work so that Ohioans could imagine a new future with young people at the center. So in 2018, we ran our largest civic engagement program to date. We've done so many different things. At the beginning of the year, we collected 75,000 signatures for a constitutional amendment campaign called Issue 1 that was going to reclassify nonviolent drug offenses to misdemeanors and do it retroactively. And the money that would be saved would go into drug treatment. So OSA itself collected 75,000 signatures of the 730,000 signatures that went to get that ballot qualified and put on the ballot in the fall. And 23,000 of those were collected by over 500 volunteers through our 23 chapter campuses by June. Oh, sorry, I just got a text. It was 800 volunteers. 800 volunteers by the 23 chapters that we had collecting all the way up to June of this year. And then after June, we switched gears to registering all those voters to make sure that they could show up for the polls. So we registered a little over 31,000 voters across the state, mostly young people of color. mostly people who were not in college. We had shifted our strategy from focusing on young people who were just on college campuses to young people who were in community and not connected to institutions and have a harder way to get messages around voting that would be important to them. And so we registered 31,000 people to vote. Another big tenet of our program was voter education and issue education. So we distributed 150,000 voter guides across the state, 60,000 of which went to local propensity voters in a number of targeted counties, mostly people of color. And that was just our second touch. Our third touch was that we knocked 107,000 doors with 25,000 conversations. Our fourth touch was 177,000 texts sent. About 125,000 of those were sent during GOTV. And then we also found out that all the people who were purged back with the Supreme Court case were going to be unpurged for the election 3 days before. So we texted 200,000 people in addition to the folks that we were already targeting for young folks in the state. I'm trying to think what else we did. I don't have any slideshows, so I just got to remember all the numbers. The long story short is we did a lot of work. We did a lot of work to move young people in the state electorally to the point where in 2014, our electoral voter turnout for young people in Ohio was at 11.6%. And in this election, it was at 35%, which was 4 points higher than national average, which was 31%. So the work that we were doing as the only youth state org that were doing electoral work for young people in our state, we directly contribute to the turnout of young folks in our state. And that wasn't even the most important work we did this year. At the same time, as we're building this massive electoral program, we knew that the amount of times that we touched and talked to young folks, if they weren't hearing messages in our state about issue 1, about voting, that were coming from people that they knew, that it would still be likely that they wouldn't show up. So simultaneously, we built a massive cultural program where we funded 25 artists, $20,000 to 25 young Black and brown artists who created messages around voting, and you leverage their social media influence networks, cultural events, and friends and family relational organizing to get the people that we were already targeting in our doors, text, and phone programs to also show up and vote, which culminated in a lot of different things. A very beautiful commercial that I'll put in this chat that you can take a look at around issue 1, 2 art crawls in Cleveland, which is the largest county in the state, Cuyahoga County, and also in Montgomery County, which is a county that is less progressive, but has been impacted by a lot of issues that impact young people. And then at least 25 different events across the state, along with at least 1 million, and maybe Kevin will correct me in the text. I think we've reached 1 million people online through our social media influence and digital program. And of those people that we've reached, 440,000 conservatively, 440,000 people we've reached digitally, and wait for the text. 400,000 of those folks turned from online signups into volunteers, which fed into our 800 people who showed up. So we did a lot of shit, y'all. We did a whole bunch of stuff in Ohio. And I think that the biggest lesson we take away, seeing the youth vote not just double but quadruple in the state, is that the most important thing that was on the ballot this year in Ohio was imagination. That young people, because of the work that we were doing, not only just touching them at the doors electorally through the door knocks, the texting, the phones, and all these different methods, but also creating content, communications, cultural experiences that were led by young people in the voices that they knew, and those folks as the experts of their experiences, telling those experiences with, maybe a fraction of the communication budgets that goes into states like Ohio. We saw that those voices cut through the noise that were happening in our state. And it also created jobs For one, racial equity, jobs in like canvassing for our organization. We were able to make sure that, you know, Black and brown folks were getting jobs that place. And we were also making sure that artists and creatives were getting jobs as communicators, as creating billboards and mailers. We did direct mail too, and voter guides. So like, not only did our organization help triple voter turnout, but we created a whole new network of young people in the pipeline to move electoral politics with messages and campaign messages that they develop with money behind it that actually impacts the communities and reaches the people in need. So I'll stop there.
Beautiful. Thank you, Prentiss. Again, highlighting that point about helping build that progressive infrastructure over the long term through the activation and engagement of young people, seeing a trend. Kat, you're up. Tell us a little bit about YUC's work and some of y'all's major lessons from this last election cycle.
Cool. So again, I'm Kat. I work at Youth United for Change. I'm the civic engagement coordinator. And I get nervous, so I've written something down. So if I'm not looking at the screen, it's because I'm reading. But a core component of YUC's vision is building an organization powerful enough to create community-based power focused on maintaining the right of Black and brown people to control their own lives, or as we call it, community control. We're based in a historically disinvested working class Puerto Rican neighborhood in lower North Philadelphia, and like many poor Black and brown neighborhoods is experiencing gentrification. At a citywide scale, we know that our folks are also largely left out of the political arena, leaving what happens to us in our communities to be in the hands of folks who don't share our experiences or interests. Of course, we also know that this is the same condition we face at the national level. We know that at all of these levels, our inability to develop folks to contest for power to determine our future has and will continue to have grave results for our folks and other oppressed peoples, both locally, nationally, and internationally. At YUC, we aim to be architects, not firefighters. So it is not enough to protest or fight against policies and ideas, but we must put forward a vision as well as work to develop conditions that make the world that we are fighting for a visible and viable alternative. In this sense, electoral organizing helps us do both. We're able to use electoral organizing to engage our folks around the fundamental question of what it would mean to have decision-making power over our lives. And it's a process that taps into decision-making processes that our communities are already familiar with. Through participating in electoral organizing, we're able to both address the problems of who is in positions of power to make decisions about what our communities look like and can do, while also working together to think through policies and practices that would serve our interests and ultimately put pressure on elected officials to be accountable to those interests. Through this process, we bring folks in relationship to our politics and way of relating that is not how many people experience the electoral system currently, which ultimately allows members to see the possibilities of our folks engaging in collective decision-making practices in service of their own interests. YUC's electoral project, which is called VOTA, is only 4 months old, so we're still trying to figure out a lot of the mechanics, but we have run through one voter registration and GOTV drive so far. And we started during the summer. So during the summer, we were focused on voter registration. We employed 4 of our youth members. We're primarily based historically as high school youth or high school aged youth. And we've expanded to be alumni, which I'll explain in a little bit. But we employed 4 of our youth to act as field managers and organized a volunteer structure of 30 members, which included alumni, family, and friends to hit the field in the surrounding community. And so for our youth who acted as field managers, it was a developmental opportunity to see themselves as leaders in a community instead of outside of the community or not in relationship to it. Which in effect, I think they really took up the role in seeing themselves as mini staff who by the end of the summer embodied the role of staff by running planning meetings, turnout calls, trainings, accountability sessions, and strategy sessions without the support of adults in the space. Additionally, the culture of the organization was finally able to be held and reproduced by our youth members and not just something that was held by staff. And for our volunteers, I think seeing their peers in these positions allowed them to engage in new ways with their peers that they hadn't beforehand. And their participation pushed them to both relate to the community and themselves in ways that they originally didn't think was possible. So for instance, young people thinking that they can't talk to people at the doors, or that they're too shy, or they don't know what they're talking about coming out of the program, and being like, well, wow, I did that, and I can do anything else, even though I might not necessarily know how to do it in the beginning. I'm willing to try and learn through that process. So in the fall, we employed our alumni. So I mentioned YUC historically has been youth in high school, but we're now building out an alumni chapter for folks that are no longer in high school to do the voter registration and GOTV work in an ongoing capacity. So we see the alumni as really integral because they're youth with some politicization and experience, and they're currently experiencing the contradictions of the system in a way that many adults do, but high school students don't fully experience. So because of this, the alumni are in prime position to engage community members around power building, around issues that people are facing. We also think that by having alumni engaged in the civic engagement work, it allows a developmental space for them to go on and organize in other spaces so that we'll have a vibrant movement ecology in the future. And then lastly, I'll just talk a little bit about some results. So in the area that we focused on, I mentioned like we're still new. So we were primarily focused in the neighborhood that YUC is based in. So in that area, which traditionally has steady rates of low voter turnout, we saw a 1.5 increase in voter turnout. When speaking to community members, we were really, folks were really excited to see young people engaging them in these kinds of conversations and to have an organization in their neighborhood doing this. We've gained 25 new donors in the immediate neighborhood and 200 new supporters who are actively want to engage YUC in an ongoing capacity. We also have seen that our work of being out in the streets and talking to folks in our neighborhood has brought other community organizations and local schools into our orbit, which then opens larger opportunities for advancing a long-term strategy of community control in Kensington.
Cool. Thank you so much. And I think one of the things I just want to name is that I think our panelists demonstrate that like the different scales that we can be operating at to start thinking about electoral strategies or deepen electoral strategies. So for people who might be listening who that's not yet part of your program, and it might, you know, you hear Prentiss talk about, you know, hiring 800 volunteers and, you know, paying however many artists you said. I was like, oh, damn, we could never do that. But then you have a group like YUC, you know, very neighborhood based, who was like really scrappily just kind of like pulled together some resources they had, hired 4 people and be like, we need to start figuring how to do this. And so it doesn't take a huge influx of resources to start thinking about how to build things out. So I just want to uplift that and appreciate that our panelists kind of represent that spectrum of the infrastructure that we're building out. And no matter where you start, we are hearing examples of how it helps build the long-term infrastructure, both for the movement ecology, like Kat said, but also directly for the work and the issues that your organizations are working on. So we've got about 10 minutes before we transition to have people kind of marinate on this stuff in some small groups. So I'm just wondering if folks want to, we're gonna kind of do like a combination of some additional reflections you have based off of what the other panelists shared. And Bob, if you want to get back in on this, you can. But then also kind of share with us what's next for you all. And based off of the work that you've done in this last cycle and what the existing political terrain is, what are the key focuses for your organization and your work over the course of the next couple of years and beyond? And if you don't mind, I don't know if we can either popcorn or we can just snake back through and start with Kat and then go in the reverse order. And we've only got about 10 minutes, so keep the comments till about, 3 or 4 minutes. So why don't we start with you, Kat, and then we'll go in the reverse order. And then Bob, if you have another thought before we go to the breakouts, we can hear from you as well.
Wait, sorry, say that again. We're sharing additional thoughts.
Yeah, so just any like additional thoughts based off of what the other panelists shared, and then maybe a word or two about kind of the key programmatic focuses for your organization between now, 2020 and beyond.
Yeah, I think what Prentiss shared about like imagination being on the agenda for the ballot, I think that what I've seen in the elections at this moment is that bold ideas are moving people across the country, and our people deserve bold ideas, right? And our organizations to push those ideas. So I think that's really what we're going to be focused on at YUC for the next period, particularly looking towards the city council races that are coming up next year in 2020. And I think that it's not enough to just put out bold ideas, but working like double checking or in relationship with the folks that are in your base or your constituency to make sure that it actually speaks to what's happening for folks on the ground. And I think that that is why we saw a lot of the local bills that got passed or sorry. I had something written, but now I'm going off script. So I think that's why we've seen a lot of wins that actually improve the conditions for the folks in our communities and that we organize with. So we're still trying to figure it out, but we're hoping to have some kind of impact in our next city council election in 2020.
All right. Prentiss?
Yeah, I mean, there's a big question, so I'll just answer it as short as I can. I mean, what we learned this year is that we have we have no issue with scale. We have the ability to reach scale. We could probably be even bigger than we were if we had more resources to do it. But one of the things that is sitting with me is the idea of reimagining everything. When I said that imagination was on the ballot, I sincerely mean it, because we get bigger, we've gotten bigger, we've been able to move and change things getting bigger, but actually the changes in the way people view the world happens at the smaller places. I think Adrienne Marine Brown talks about, the small things or the small spaces. So where I see us going is that like the infrastructure in Ohio and in the Midwest in general is just not used to moving people at the small level. They're thinking culturally there so that it can actually spread across the state, across the region, across the nation. So I see us as being leaders in like, hey, look what imagination inspired with this group of people. Look at how they showed up. This imagination can be shared amongst working class people, amongst white, black, all these different groups. And if we work towards allowing these people to actually view the world differently before we show up at their door to ask them to come vote for something, then and only then will we actually have a cultural shift that allows for what we saw happening in the youth share. So I think in like states like Texas and in Colorado, where we see demographic shifts, and even in the South, it's easier because the generation is coming up with new ideas because the culture is already existing there. We're reinforcing it. I don't believe that culture can't shift every person on this planet. So then I think the role of young people then is to use culture, use our expertise of moving and creating culture with young people to shift the landscape in our state so that we can actually so that our votes matter even more than they do, so that they actually have more impact, because the people that we need to move to believe what we believe actually believe it too. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Prentiss. Jasmine?
Yeah, I just kind of on what Prentiss was saying, I know like cultural strategy is something that is so powerful, and I think young people harness it in a way that is so intuitive. And I think it's something we want to keep investing in. I mean, I look at our group of young folks, and we have, young queer people of color, young parents, non-binary folks, people who, we talk about like radical imagination, but it's like the radical reality. And I think it's about like getting people to say like, this is power, and also to hold folks accountable. I think something that happens here a lot is we young people feel like when it comes to voting, it's like the lesser of two evils that they're voting for. And so like really changing that to say, we're not gonna just be on the defensive all the time and be reactive, but how do we like build an offense? So for us going into next year, something that we really realized is, it's not enough to do like GOTV and get out the vote, but to actually do like voter education. So, we heard a lot of folks say, I want to vote, but I don't know who to vote for or like how to vote or what these seats are. And so we're really going to be taking our voter reg model, school-based, site-based, peer-to-peer, to do just like voter education. What is a district attorney do? What is the sheriff's office? What is the sheriff responsible for? Because these are seats, like I'm saying, people are running unopposed for sheriff year after year, when we know that they have a huge impact on letting ICE into our communities. So doing that voter education, because what we're seeing is like people are passionate about these issues because they affect their families, they affect their well-being, but they haven't connected it to electoral things because elections were not made for us, right? They count on us not voting. And so we have to make the connect. When we talk to somebody about pesticides, when we talk to somebody about housing, when we talk to somebody about not being able to access birth control that's affordable, like people have a story and they have something that's pushing them. We just need to connect that to voting, but also like holding people accountable. People, I don't know if we have this mind frame that like the election's over, let's debrief and move on with our lives. But this is when it starts. This is like, okay, like you're my new person, like you're going to be hearing from me. So also doing stuff with young folks, how to write a letter, how to call your elected, how to let them know that they work for us. And those are all skills, right? And like young people are primed to be leading this work. So that's really what I see our work in 2019 being, and also growing to scale. I think the Central Valley in California is a microcosm of like what's happening in rural communities. And I think if we can build scale here, like we can really take those strategies and learn from what folks in other rural communities are doing. But it's not gonna come from the top down. So I'm really excited for 2019, even more excited for 2020.
That's what's up. Thank you, Jasmine. So we're gonna, in a moment, we'll transition to small group discussions, but before we do that, any other reflections, Bob, from you after hearing the rest of our panelists share?
For me, just great panel, great work, everyone. Keep it up.
Cool. All right, so I hope everybody is still with us, because we're gonna break everybody who's on the call into some small groups to kind of dissect this. So you're gonna have about 15 minutes. You're gonna be in a group with about 3 or 4 other people. Will or Mona, can one of you drop the link to the small group slides? So this is the way it's gonna work. You're gonna get broken up into a small group. If you haven't already linked your phone to your video camera, please do that so that you don't end up split between 2 breakout groups. If you don't know how to do that, send a chat to questions and will send you the slides with the instructions. But we just dropped the slide, the small group notes slide, so everybody can click on that in the chat. And when we break you up into small groups, you're gonna get a screen. Sorry, I'm gonna do a quick screen share. So when we break you up into small groups, your window is gonna look like this. Well, it won't have Will and me scary Unabomber hoods in your face, but just for the purposes of demonstration, at the top of the screen, it'll say breakout room, and then there'll be a number. And then if you go to the slideshow that we just dropped a link for, go to the corresponding group number, and there's a place for you to take notes. So when you open up that slide, it's gonna look like this. So look at the top of your screen once you get into your breakout group, and then just ask everybody to type the names of your group members in the top of the slide, and then just kind of keep some bullet point notes. We don't need like word for word what everybody said, but since we won't have time to do like a complete go around of everybody who's on the call, we do want to capture some of the major themes that people discuss. So in a moment, I'll break you up. Once you get into your small groups, just folks introduce yourselves, maybe say a word about how how much electoral strategy is a part of your work, which could be like not at all to, central to our vision of how we win. And then just respond to these questions. From the conversation that we've had thus far, from Bob's opening analysis through what the panel said, what from this conversation really resonates with you? And then what are some of the major questions or differences you have with what's been shared around this approach to electoral work, strategy, et cetera. And I'm gonna stay in the main breakout room. So if you have any tech issues, you can come back here between Mona, Will, and myself. We will get it situated. We'll get it figured out. All right, so the breakout rooms are open. You can go ahead and click join. It's gonna take you to a group, and then find the correct notes page for your group to take notes of your conversation.
Someone asked in the chat where we can find good data on youth voter turnout. I dropped the link to Circle in there, but if folks have some other resources for voter turnout data that they would share or recommend, love to hear that. Next question is, what other alternative metrics did organizations use to define success? I've heard number of leaders and depth, number of youth engaged, number of new organizational relationships, number of shifts in community attitude around an organization and young people. Love to hear any other suggestions there. Last question, I would love to hear how people build structures that build resiliency. I've seen folks get super discouraged when a campaign or candidates doesn't go the way they worked for.
So Kat, Prentiss, Jasmine, do y'all have any thoughts on, so one was just a question about what are some of the metrics you use to measure success, aside from just like kind of vote share and those sorts of things? Like how are you measuring that? And then building in resiliency, especially since, people put in a lot of work, a lot of energy, and sometimes the campaigns don't go the way people hope.
I can go unless other folks want to go first.
Go for it, and then we'll see if Jasmine and Kat want to get into.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the metrics, all the metrics that were mentioned are ones that we are also tracking. One that we're working through now, because like part of our work is culture shifting work, is like how in the public sphere in Ohio, how much is the words that we're using co-created, joy, authenticity? I mean, how are the words that were generated through our process being used in the world? How many people are using Midwest culture as a hashtag in the state? Because that also shows people are shifting culture even that the campaign is over. So that's one way that we're like tracking and see how people are actually engaging in a movement that's past just us in just the one fight. And which goes into the second question, how do you build resilience in a campaign? For one, you don't promise that the campaign is a thing that will change your life. That's why I said that, imagination was on the ballot. We built issue 1 and we lost really bad. It was like Tuesday night sucked really bad because we had fought for like 15 months to make that happen. But Wednesday didn't suck as bad because what we built was not built based on issue 1 winning. It was built on our imagination about what the world could look like. Earlier, I dropped the link in here to our Instagram page and our Facebook page. If you click on our Facebook link, you'll see a video called Imagine a World Without Cages. It was a campaign ad we created around issue 1 that was important because what we actually asked folks to do is imagine past what issue 1 would do for us in the world we want to go. And that this is one step to get there. And even if we don't pass that, we still go towards that step. That step still exists. We still move forward. So when we lost and we went, Tuesday night sucked and Wednesday came and Thursday came, I saw artists and young people across the state started leaning into resilience with each other as in talking about, wow, the world we want still exists because we said yes to it, because we said that we were going to fight, and I'm still going to show up, and I'm still going to create. So I think it's about creating that vision and creating an expectation that the world exists past the action you're doing before we get there. That's how we've built resilience in Ohio.
Jasmine or Kat, y'all want to get in on this?
Yeah, so I think throughout, especially for us, throughout the campaign, we really focus on storytelling. So we do a lot of like, like, why is this issue important for you? That's how we really lead, is like personal investment. Like, why are you here? You know, we're having, if we have a night with some really bad calls, a lot of either voter fatigue on the phones or people not being receptive, we take a break and we really talk again about like, what does this mean? Like, why are we here? We know this is going to be a long haul and a heavy lift, but like, what are our wins, right? I think that's something that in order for us to be in this work long term, we need to redefine what the wins are going to be. And I think that's something we try to be really intentional about, and also like celebrating our folks. Everyone on staff, whether they're involved in campaigns or not, like is called in to make sure that they're honoring every time they see a young person in the building, honoring their work and really like hyping them up, amping them up. We also just have fun. Like, people are always surprised, and I'm like, our young folks love campaign. Like, when campaign's over, they're like, when's the next one? And because we keep it fun, we do contests. They were really into Halloween socks this year, we built a little family, and it's a little community. We had a lot of young people who were vegans on this team this time. They were cooking for each other. And I think that's that thing about like just personal resiliency. We don't have a lot of mental health resources in this area. So sometimes we really, really got to like lean on each other and how to like uplift each other. And also like, this work is hard. It's confrontational. These are young people who are on the front line in a really hostile area, and they're asking people, things that some people aren't open to talking about. And so we have to really honor like their emotional health, their mental health, and make sure that they're going to be with us for the long haul, and that it's not a transactional thing. I think that's something that we always try to really like center as far as like resiliency. We also kind of what Prentiss was saying, culture. We bring culture into our space. We were calling on Dia de los Muertos. We had our altar. We were here. We talked about our ancestors and our families and like what this work means and what it would mean to have, housing with dignity for our folks. So that's something. Also, other wins are we, on the data side, I keep a leadership tracker for our folks. We also track our allies, either in collaboratives, also our allies in elected positions, to see like how we want to make sure that we're growing those connections in a strategic way, and that's a way that we measure that as well.
Yeah.
Cool. And I'll just add a little bit to the resiliency. I think we do it in multiple ways. One, like we make it a priority in our political education to train our young people in emotional intelligence. So when they're going out in the field, we are teaching like different exercises like centering. How do you stay present in a moment that might be particularly hard when you want to like shut down or like wild out on somebody? And that isn't going to be the best reaction. Like, how do you maintain yourself and still reach the goals that you're trying to reach. So we engage in like centering practices all the time. We try to work on developing our young people's emotional intelligence so that they're able to bounce back in those moments instead of just like completely shutting down. I think that also means like we have to create a culture that even in our losses, like we're gonna be here for you. Like it's not over, you know, if you lose or if you don't do something right, which I think is what society tells you, is that when you don't do something right or you've lost, like you don't matter anymore. And I think part of that is because YUC, or like we're creating a culture of experimentation, so that even if we don't get things right or like didn't make those wins, everything's still a lesson. Like it's really important even when we lose, and to hold that and like remember that so that you can look back and learn from that in order to move forward. It's not like you lost and it's completely over, but there's actual opportunities even in losses that can help us win in the future.
Yeah, something that's coming up for me and what you all three shared is one of the fundamental differences between the way our groups are positioned to do civic engagement that's different than the kind of political mercenary shops that just kind of like parachute in the months before. They treat their canvassers as workers to be exploited and knock on. It's all about how many doors you knock on and both share and then they're out, versus the long-term commitment both to the people who are engaging the community and the voters and the voters in the community themselves. And also that how we're defining victory is not just about like the outcome of the specific election, but are we building leaders? Are we building infrastructure? Is our organization stronger for the next round? Yeah, so I think that's a really key thing that distinguishes the way that we are positioned to approach voter work with our organizations from some of those other shops. You know, we've got about 25 participants on the line, so it's a small enough group that if people want to kind of ask questions directly or comment, you can literally just physically raise your hand because I can see you and we can call on you if you want to get in. Other than that, I'm not sure, Will, were there any more questions that came in through the chat?
Yes, we got a couple more questions. First one is, how do we make sure that young people are at the table that often makes decisions for them, but does not include them? I'm going to go on to the second one.
Yeah, let's hear a couple and then see if our panel wants to respond to any of them.
Second question is, does your voter organizing build your capacity to win issue campaigns or take away from it? How has that actually played out? That's it.
Cool. So why don't we let's do, if panelists want to respond to either of those two questions, and then we can actually transition into kind of final remarks. So there was one question about like how to make sure young people are actually at the table when decisions are being made about them or about their lives. And then what was the second one, Will?
Does your voter organizing build your capacity or take away?
Yeah, from the issue organizing work, right? Cool. Did we lose Jasmine? I think Jasmine might have got bumped from the call. Kat or Prentiss, do either one of y'all want to respond to that? And then also offer any closing remarks?
Kat, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go. So I think outside of our civic engagement work, we also have a community control campaign that's based in the local schools here. That's focused on getting students, teachers, community members, parents all at the table to make decisions about what's happening in their schools. So that's like a place where we're testing out how to get young people and the people that care about them at the table to talk about the issues that they're facing and practice real decision-making power in their communities. And so that I think is how like we're still really early in our electoral work, but our by having a frame of community control working in the same like broader community that we're working in, I think that really just builds on to the local community control work that we're doing in schools. And I think in general, we're trying to take on things like really do organizational evaluations, like have really hard conversations and principled struggle in our, like as staff, to evaluate whether or not like the things that we're taking on add to our capacity. Like how do they add to our capacity? Like what are the hours and things that are going to be needed to do this? Like, does it actually grow our relationships? How are we measuring things? Or does it actually take away? So I think that practice has just been really useful, and would encourage everybody to engage in that.
So how do we get young people at the table? I think that's a challenging question because, oftentimes when they're at the table, it's just like ceremonial, and it's not about actually real power. But I think that part of how we get to the table is either one, running really awesome state programs and having the ability to show with data and with your work that you can run the programs that other statewide organizations or local organizations can run. And then I think the other way is by losing. I think that when y'all lose together, y'all got to figure out how to do something differently. And I think that's an opportunity we have in Ohio now, is that like the Eagles have to leave the table and we have to figure out what, like, empirically what happened and what can we do together. But I think that you have to be real, like young folks who are leading organizations have to be really clear about what they offer and what they need to offer to their state based on the trends of what's happening in their communities. And they got to like be very clear on that. And I think sometimes funders have an opportunity to convene partners to allow for that to happen. So that could be intervening if you don't have that power in your state. And power is so much about position and race, class, background. So there's a lot of different dynamics at play in that. I think tables, C3 tables can help facilitate that. But really, it comes down to you being able to, unfortunately, your ability just to articulate that what you have adds value and that you need to be a part of whatever it is that's being built. And that, like, without it, show what happens when your thing is not there. What's lost there. So that's the first thing. And then the question around, does electoral work add or take away from our advocacy work, our advocacy campaigns? The answer is yes and no. I mean, our electoral programs brings in tons of people, but it also burns a lot of people out because people understand at this point that electoral politics are very challenging and can yield very little depending on what communities you're in. And so it could drain a lot of energy while also building a lot of capacity because of the energy around the election and also just the resources that come in. So it does both. And then, it does both. It just depends on how you use it. I think this year we were able to integrate a very important issue campaign into our electoral fight that allowed us to build amazing capacity instead of investing in the election being our end goal. We invested in building the organization, and the election was just a part of the steps of building that our organization. So I think that that's true. And then also, our targets are often people we're electing. So being involved in our electoral work allows to build capacity for folks to understand who has power. And then after the elections, like, how do you hold them accountable? Yes and no.
And then Jasmine, welcome back. The question that folks were responding to that we got in was two questions. One was about how to make sure that young people are meaningfully at decision-making tables. And the second question was about whether or not electoral organizing adds capacity to the issue organizing work or subtracts from.
Okay, I'm going to answer both questions kind of in one, but something for us, like I mentioned earlier, is that the work is authentically led by folks. So we're lucky that we get to do IB year round. And one of the ways that we make sure that it's authentic organizing work is it being led by these young people. And so in the last couple of years that we've done this, young people are the ones who are creating the campaigns around issues that are important to them. Like earlier this year, I had shared in our breakout session that when we started the fall semester last year, it had been like the week right after what had happened in Charlottesville and the repeal of DACA. And those were two issues that really resonated with one of our high school chapters, actually both of them, and they wanted to do something about it. And so we were lucky that we had the capacity and infrastructure from doing voter engagement to support them in leading a campaign. So one of our chapters, they decided they wanted to make their school district a sanctuary school, but attaching real things to it. So making sure that all the teachers went through a competency training that also included supporting our LGBTQ students. And they led that campaign from beginning to finish. They engaged all the registered voters and their community, but also visited, because this is a largely mixed status community, they were also having conversations and getting petitions signed that they created. And then they were able to go to the school board and present on that. And so aside from having our staff supporting logistical stuff, doing rides, providing tech, they really had ownership over that campaign. They wrote up the resolution. And so that's one way to really like organize at a level that is going to have an impact on their community, but also that's leading with issues that are important to them. Another campaign they did was around, they had some students show up at their school wearing Confederate flag sweaters. And this was in light of like a history of a district that doesn't address racism. And actually from that organizing work, the ACLU is currently suing that school district. And so we're hoping that changes come around. But through IVE, we were able to have a phone bank where we called supporters to do some education around the issue, but I also asked them to show up to school board meeting. So for us, it's really added capacity, like I said, to organize in an organized way. So, you know, we have our supporters that we've ID'd, and now, okay, like if we have somebody who has multiple flags, okay, that person can become a donor. That person should become a volunteer. Like we have to get really strategic so that we're not just casting out a net and see who it catches, but that we're actually like developing our community to show up. And so, and for us, it's been really important that young people are leading on the issues that are important to them, and that we're not just saying like, hey, this is what's in the news, this is what we should be organizing around. And I think I mentioned too in our breakout, the way that this happens for us is that there aren't many spaces that are youth-centered in our area. And so people come to us, young people come because they know that there's safety there. It's made for them. And there aren't that many spaces here. But it's also, you know, being accountable to young people. If they have feedback, we want to make sure that it's being implemented at the organizational level, which kind of can be hard if you have folks, you know, on your board or places. So we want to be really intentional that our like theory of change, everything really goes back to the fact that like this is a youth space. You know, and that's an ongoing process as well. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you to our panel. We're gonna transition to close out. So with that, we've got a eval poll. So before folks log off, if you could take a minute and just respond to the few questions that we had there in the evaluation. One quick announcement. The deadline for the Learning Exchange Fund for FCYO is December 14th. So if your group or groups that you're connected to are thinking about submitting a proposal, just keep that in mind. It's exactly a month from today. And so with that, I'm gonna see if, once again, I wanna thank our panelists and just see if each of you have any final words. You good? Bob, I don't know if you have any final thoughts before we wrap up. And then again, like I said, just thank everybody for joining today. So Bob, did you have any final thoughts?
Just great panel, great discussion, and I compare it to when I was young. I got radicalized when I was 17 in 1968 at the height of the radical movement of the 60s. And we completely stayed out of electoral politics. And we looked up, and in 1968, the height of the radical movement, a reactionary, Richard Nixon, was elected president. Ronald Reagan was the governor of California, and the state power came down on us hard. It started before then, but it came down hard, and we got marginalized, and even ourselves lost track of where we really were on a real power map, which participating in elections is so important too as well. So I'm just really heartened by what I've heard and the great creativity and determination you all are bringing to this work.
Awesome. Thank you, Bob. I think with that, we're good. Appreciate everybody staying on through the end. Please respond to that eval poll if you haven't done it already. And if you have any direct feedback on how to make these better, please email me. My email is hashim@fcyo.org. And we'll be sending out the slides and the recording too if people want to share those. All right, onward.